Chapter 1. The Feeling I Couldn't Name. The morning started like many others. The alarm rang at the same time. I reached out, turned it off, and lay still for a moment, staring at the ceiling. Light came in through the window. The room was quiet, calm, ordinary. Nothing felt wrong. I got out of bed, washed my face, and looked at myself in the mirror. My eyes looked awake. My face looked normal. I didn't look sad or tired. I didn't look like someone who was struggling. I brushed my teeth. I fixed my hair. I got dressed. Everything worked. In the kitchen, I made coffee and stood by the counter while it brewed. The smell filled the room. I took a sip and felt the warmth. It was good, familiar. This was my life. From the outside, it looked fine. I had a job, I had a place to live, I paid my bills, I answered messages, I showed up when I was expected to. People would say I was doing well. I believed them. But as I stood there with my coffee, something felt missing. Not in a loud way, not in a painful way. It was quiet, constant, like a low sound I had stopped noticing because it had been there for so long. I couldn't name it. I wasn't sad, I wasn't angry, I wasn't disappointed. I just felt empty. It wasn't the kind of emptiness that comes after losing something. It wasn't sharp. It didn't come with tears or fear. It felt like absence, like something that should be there wasn't. I went through the rest of the morning on autopilot. I checked my phone, I replied to messages, I read the news without really taking it in. Time moved forward, but I felt slightly behind it, like I was watching my own life from a short distance. At work, I did what I always did. I talked to people, I smiled, I nodded at the right moments, I completed my tasks. No one noticed anything different. Neither did I at first. But during a quiet moment, when I was alone at my desk, the feeling returned. The same soft emptiness, the same sense that I was present, but not fully here. I paused and asked myself a simple question. What am I feeling? No answer came. That confused me. I had words for most things: stress, tired, busy, fine. This was none of those. It felt like my emotions were turned down, not gone, just distant. I tried to remember the last time I felt something strongly, real excitement, deep sadness, clear joy. Nothing came easily. I told myself it didn't matter. Life isn't always exciting. Adults don't feel things all the time. That made sense, so I kept going. The day passed without problems. Meetings ended, tasks were done, conversations happened. From the outside, it was a good day. Inside, it felt flat. On the way home, I noticed the city around me. Cars moved, people walked quickly, talking on their phones, laughing, looking busy. Everyone seemed to be somewhere. I was too, but I didn't feel connected to it. At home, I put my keys on the table and took off my shoes. The apartment was quiet, clean, familiar. I sat down and turned on the lights. Still, nothing felt wrong. And that was the strange part. If something was broken, I could fix it. If I was sad, I could talk about it. If I was tired, I could rest. But this had no shape. I made dinner and ate without paying attention to the taste. I watched something on TV, but couldn't remember what it was about. I checked my phone again, hoping for something to pull me out of myself. Nothing did. Later, I sat on the couch and stared at the wall for a moment longer than usual. That was when the thought came. Nothing was wrong, but nothing felt real. The sentence surprised me. I said it again, quietly. Nothing was wrong, but nothing felt real. I wasn't unhappy. I just didn't feel present. It was as if I had slowly stepped away from my own life without noticing, day by day, year by year. No big event marked the change, no moment where everything collapsed, just time. I thought about how long I had felt this way. Not days, not weeks, years. The idea made me uncomfortable, not scared, just uneasy, like realizing you've been sitting in the same position for too long. I tried to remember when the emptiness started, after a change, after a loss, after something ended. Nothing stood out. It hadn't arrived suddenly. It had settled in quietly. I understood then why it was so hard to explain, why I never talked about it, why I didn't even admit it to myself. It didn't look like a problem, but it was affecting everything. It was the reason I felt distant in conversations, the reason small joys didn't last, the reason days blended together. I hadn't lost my life. I had lost connection to it. That thought scared me, more than sadness ever could. I sat there, breathing slowly, letting the realization settle. I didn't try to fix it. I didn't promise myself change. I just noticed it. For the first time, I stopped pretending everything was fine just because it looked fine. The emptiness didn't disappear when I noticed it, but it felt clearer, less confusing, like naming something that had been following me for a long time. I didn't know what it meant yet. I didn't know what to do with it. All I knew was this. I had been feeling empty for years, not broken, not failing, just quietly disconnected. And now that I could finally see it, I sensed that this feeling wasn't the end of something. It was the beginning of listening. Chapter 2. Living on Autopilot. The days began to feel the same, not in a comforting way, but in a dull one. I woke up, got dressed, and left the apartment at the same time every morning. I walked the same streets, passed the same buildings, and stood in the same places. My body knew what to do before my mind did. I didn't think much about my mornings anymore. I moved through them. At work, I greeted people with the same words. Good morning. How are you? I answered the same way every time. I'm good. It was true in a simple way. I wasn't sick. I wasn't in trouble. Nothing bad was happening. So I said I was good. I sat at my desk and opened my computer. Emails appeared. Tasks waited. I replied, clicked, typed, and finished what needed to be done. My hands moved quickly. My mind followed slowly. Time passed without resistance. I noticed how easy everything felt. Too easy. I wasn't struggling, but I wasn't engaged either. I did my work well enough. I met expectations. I stayed responsible. People trusted me. That felt important. During breaks, I stood with coworkers and talked about simple things, weather, plans, small complaints that didn't mean much. I smiled at the right moments. I laughed when others laughed. No one asked if I was okay. There was no reason to. I looked fine. Inside, I felt far away. It was like watching myself from the outside, like I was part of my own life, but not fully present in it. I heard my voice speak, but it didn't feel connected to anything inside me. I didn't feel sad. I didn't feel happy. I felt neutral. That neutrality followed me everywhere. On the bus ride home, I stared out the window. Buildings passed by, people got on and off, conversations floated through the air, unfinished and unimportant. I didn't listen closely. My thoughts stayed quiet, but not peaceful, empty, but not calm. At home, I followed the same pattern. Shoes off, keys on the table, lights on, dinner prepared without much thought. I ate while standing or sitting, barely tasting the food. Sometimes I turned on the television, sometimes I didn't. Either way, it didn't make much difference. I wasn't bored. I wasn't interested. I realized how strange that was. When I was younger, I felt things strongly: excitement, disappointment, hope, frustration. Even bad days had weight. Now everything felt light in the wrong way, thin. I tried to remember when I stopped feeling deeply. There was no clear answer, no single moment when something changed. It had happened slowly. Responsibilities grew, expectations settled in, life became something to manage instead of something to experience. I didn't resist it. I adapted. I became reliable. That felt like progress. But somewhere along the way, my emotions faded into the background. Not gone, just quiet enough to ignore. People around me saw someone stable, someone calm, someone who had things under control. They told me I was doing well. I nodded and agreed. What else could I say? I didn't have a problem to explain. I didn't have a reason to complain. Nothing was broken, and yet I felt disconnected from myself. Sometimes, in small moments, I noticed it clearly, like when someone shared good news and I smiled, but felt nothing inside, or when something disappointing happened and I knew I should care more, but didn't. The reactions came automatically. The feelings didn't. I started to wonder if this was just adulthood, if this was what it meant to grow up, to become practical, to stop expecting too much. That idea comforted me for a while. If everyone felt this way, then there was nothing wrong with me. But then I watched others laugh freely, speak with energy, get excited about plans, get angry about things that mattered to them. They felt alive. I felt steady. There was a difference. I avoided thinking about it too much. I filled my evenings with quiet tasks: cleaning, organizing, planning the next day. Staying busy helped me avoid the question I didn't want to answer: why don't I feel anything? One evening, after finishing everything I needed to do, I sat on the couch and stared at the wall. The room was quiet. My phone lay on the table nearby. I didn't reach for it. I just sat there. The thought returned, clearer than before. I was living my life, but I wasn't inside it. The sentence felt heavy. It explained everything. I wasn't absent from my responsibilities. I wasn't avoiding my duties. I wasn't failing. I was disconnected. I lived on autopilot. I did what was expected, not what was felt. That realization didn't bring panic. It brought sadness, a soft sadness, mixed with understanding. I had chosen this without realizing it. I had focused on stability, routine, and control. I had learned how to function well, but I hadn't learned how to stay emotionally present. I wasn't angry at myself. I understood why it happened. Life can be demanding. It asks for attention, energy, and consistency. Feelings can get in the way, so we learn to quiet them. At first, it feels helpful. Later, it feels empty. I sat with that thought for a while. I didn't try to change anything. I didn't promise myself a new beginning. I just noticed where I was. Living on autopilot wasn't a failure. It was a coping skill I had used for too long. The numbness wasn't proof that I was broken. It was proof that I had been protecting myself. That understanding softened something inside me. I didn't feel better right away, but I felt seen. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was standing close to myself again. Not fully connected yet, but aware. Aware that something was missing. Aware that it mattered. And aware that noticing it was the first step out of autopilot. I turned off the lights and went to bed. As I lay there, the familiar quiet returned. This time, it felt different. Not empty, waiting. Chapter 3. Smiling without feeling. I started to notice it in small moments. Someone would tell a joke and I would laugh. Not because it was funny, but because that was what I was supposed to do. The sound came out of me easily, practiced and light, but it didn't come from anywhere real. I laughed without joy. At first, I didn't think much of it. People smile all the time. Politeness asks for it. Social life depends on it. But once I noticed it, I couldn't unsee it. I noticed how quickly my face reacted before my feelings did. A smile appeared even when nothing inside me moved. My body knew the language of social moments better than my emotions did. It happened at work. It happened with friends. It happened in conversations that should have meant something. Someone shared good news, and I smiled. I said the right words. I sounded supportive. Inside, there was no excitement. Someone talked about something difficult, and I nodded. I offered comfort. I cared in theory. Inside, there was no feeling. That scared me, not in a dramatic way, quietly, slowly. I started asking myself questions I didn't like. What kind of person feels nothing? Why am I reacting correctly but feeling empty? Is something wrong with me? I didn't say those questions out loud. I kept them inside, where they felt safer. I didn't want anyone to hear them. I didn't want anyone to look at me differently. So I kept smiling. I smiled so people wouldn't ask questions. That sentence stayed with me once it formed. It felt too honest to ignore. I thought about how often I used my smile as a shield, how easily it ended conversations, how effectively it told people I was fine, even when I wasn't sure what fine meant anymore. A smile asked for nothing. No explanation, no concern, no follow-up. It protected me, but it also hid me. I noticed how tiring it was to keep it in place, how often my face hurt slightly by the end of the day, how relieved I felt when I was finally alone and didn't have to perform anymore. That relief told me something important. I wasn't enjoying connection. I was managing it. I remembered a moment from a recent gathering. Everyone was sitting around a table, talking and laughing. The room was warm, full of sound. On the surface, it looked like a good moment. I sat there smiling, listening, responding when needed. But inside, I felt distant, like I was behind glass, watching something happen without fully being part of it. When I got home that night, the quiet felt heavy, but honest. I didn't miss anyone. I missed myself. That thought made my chest tighten. I felt shame rise slowly, like a wave I couldn't stop. Shame about feeling empty when I had no clear reason to be. Shame about not appreciating what I had. Shame about smiling through moments that deserved real emotion. I told myself I should be grateful. I told myself others had it worse. I told myself to stop thinking so much. But none of that helped. The emptiness didn't leave. It waited. I started to notice how careful I was with my words, how I avoided talking about how I really felt by never letting conversations go too deep. I stayed on safe topics. I kept things light. If I stayed light, no one would look too closely. If no one looked too closely, I wouldn't have to explain what I didn't understand. I realized how long I had been doing this, years maybe, slowly building a version of myself that was pleasant, stable, and emotionally neutral. People liked that version. They trusted it. They felt comfortable around it. But that version wasn't fully me. It was a simplified version, a quieter one that didn't take up too much emotional space. I wondered when I decided this was safer. I wondered what I was afraid would happen if I stopped smiling. Would people see disappointment? Would they ask questions I couldn't answer? Would they think I was ungrateful, dramatic, broken? I didn't want to find out, so I kept smiling. But awareness had started to grow. Once I saw the pattern, I couldn't ignore it. Every automatic smile felt heavier. Every polite reaction felt like a small distance added between me and myself. I noticed how my body reacted when I was alone, how my face relaxed, how my shoulders dropped, how my breathing slowed. That was real. The rest felt practiced. One evening, I stood in front of the bathroom mirror and looked at myself. I tried to smile on purpose. Then I let it fall away. The difference startled me. Without the smile, my face looked tired, honest, softer in a way that felt unfamiliar. I realized how rarely I let my face rest like that in front of others. I realized how much effort it took to keep everything smooth. I wasn't unhappy, but I wasn't present either. That was the truth I couldn't avoid anymore. The numbness was no longer invisible. I could see it, and seeing it was the first step towards feeling again. Chapter 4. When distraction became my refuge. Once I became aware of the emptiness, I started running from it. Not in obvious ways, not dramatically. I didn't quit my job or disappear. I didn't panic or tell anyone something was wrong. I stayed busy. I filled my time carefully, the way someone fills a quiet room with sound. My phone was always nearby. Music played while I cooked. Videos played while I ate. Messages filled small spaces between tasks. If there was noise, I didn't have to listen to myself. I didn't notice it at first. It felt normal. Everyone stayed busy. Everyone checked their phone. Everyone complained about having no time. I told myself I was just keeping up. But slowly, I began to see the pattern. The moment things became quiet, my hand reached for my phone. When I finished one task, I started another immediately. When a plan ended, I made a new one. Stillness made me uncomfortable. I avoided it without thinking. At work, I volunteered for extra tasks. I stayed late. I answered emails quickly, even when they could wait. Being needed gave me direction. It kept my attention outward. At home, I rarely sat down without something playing in the background. Silence felt too open, too honest. I told myself I liked multitasking, but what I really liked was distraction. Noise softened the edges of my thoughts. People filled emotional space. Busyness gave me a reason not to stop. I didn't want to stop, because stopping meant feeling, and I didn't know what I would feel. I noticed how restless I became when plans were canceled. Even when I needed rest, I felt uneasy with empty time. I would scroll through my phone without interest, just to avoid being still. Minutes passed that way, sometimes hours. At the end of the day, I felt tired but not satisfied, busy but not fulfilled. The emptiness didn't disappear, it grew. I realized that distraction worked only for short moments. It covered the feeling, but it didn't change it. As soon as the noise stopped, the emptiness returned, quieter but heavier. I tried different forms of distraction: social plans, entertainment, productivity, even self-improvement content. Anything that promised movement, anything that promised progress. but none of it touched what I felt underneath. One evening, after a long day filled with activity, I came home and dropped my bag by the door. My phone buzzed in my hand. Another notification, another reason to stay connected. I looked at the screen and felt nothing. I put the phone down and stood there for a moment, unsure of what to do next. The apartment was quiet. The silence pressed in immediately. My first instinct was to turn something on. Instead, I paused. The discomfort rose quickly. Not panic, but tension. My chest felt tight. My thoughts started racing. This is boring. You should do something. Why are you just standing here? I recognized the voice. It was the same voice that pushed me to stay busy, the same voice that warned me away from stillness. I realized something important in that moment. I wasn't avoiding boredom. I was avoiding myself. The emptiness I felt wasn't caused by lack of activity. It was caused by lack of connection to my emotions, my needs, my inner life. Distraction had become my refuge, a place to hide. The more I stayed busy, the emptier I felt. The sentence formed clearly, and once it did, it wouldn't leave me alone. I thought about how often I had confused movement with healing, how easily I believed that doing more would make me feel more. But it hadn't. It had done the opposite. Busyness had numbed me. Noise had flattened my feelings. Constant connection had pulled me away from myself. I sat down on the couch and let the silence stay. I didn't reach for anything. I didn't fix the moment. I just sat. The emptiness was still there, but now I could see how much I had been feeding it, how much energy I spent avoiding quiet, how many years I had treated stillness like something dangerous. The fear wasn't loud, it was subtle. It said things like, if you stop, you'll fall behind. If you're quiet, you'll feel worse. If you're alone with your thoughts, you won't like what you hear. I believed those things without questioning them. But sitting there, nothing terrible happened. I felt uncomfortable. That was all. No collapse, no crisis, just discomfort. And that discomfort felt manageable. I noticed how my body slowly relaxed when I stopped fighting the silence. My breathing slowed. My shoulders dropped slightly. The urge to distract myself weakened. I thought about how modern life makes it easy to avoid ourselves. There is always something to watch, read, listen to, respond to. Silence has become optional, but optional doesn't mean unnecessary. I wondered how long it had been since I truly sat with myself without interruption, without input, without noise. The answer made me sad. Too long. I had built a life full of activity, but empty of presence. I had filled my days, but neglected my inner world. Distraction hadn't saved me from emptiness. It had deepened it. That realization hurt, but it also made sense. It explained why I felt tired even when I wasn't doing anything hard, why rest didn't feel restful, why entertainment didn't feel enjoyable. I wasn't resting, I was avoiding. The difference mattered. I sat there longer, letting the truth settle. I didn't judge myself for it. I understood why I did it. Avoidance can feel like safety when emotions feel confusing. I had done what I knew how to do, but now I knew more. I knew that silence wasn't the enemy, avoidance was. The emptiness I felt wasn't asking for more distraction, it was asking for attention. Attention without judgment, attention without escape. I didn't suddenly feel better, but I felt clearer. I turned off the lights and went to bed that night without my phone in my hand. The room felt quiet. My thoughts felt close. I was still afraid of stillness, but now I knew why. And knowing why made it slightly less powerful. Distraction had been my refuge, but it wasn't my solution. The emptiness wasn't something I could outrun. Chapter 5. The night I finally admitted it. The night didn't arrive with anything special. No argument, no phone call, no moment that forced me to stop. It was just another evening, quiet and ordinary, the kind I had learned how to feel without thinking. The lights were low, the city outside had slowed down. Cars passed occasionally, their sound fading quickly into the background. I stood in the middle of the room for a moment, holding my phone. There was nothing urgent on it, no messages waiting, no reason to scroll. I placed it face down on the table and sat on the couch. The silence settled in gently. At first, I felt the familiar discomfort, the small restlessness in my chest, the urge to do something, anything, to avoid sitting still. But I didn't move. I leaned back and let my head rest against the cushion. The room felt steady, the air felt calm. And then, without warning, the truth arrived. Not loudly, not dramatically. It arrived the way real truths often do, quietly, when there is nowhere left to hide. I had been feeling empty for years. The thought didn't shock me. It didn't scare me. It simply felt true. I replayed the last few years in my mind, the routines, the conversations, the days that passed without much memory attached to them, the smiles, the busyness, the constant effort to stay functional. I had told myself I was fine. I had told others the same. But sitting there in the quiet, I could no longer avoid what I had been protecting myself from. The emptiness hadn't started recently. It hadn't come from one bad experience or a single loss. It had grown slowly, unnoticed, while I focused on everything else. I felt a tightness in my throat, not enough to cry, but enough to feel the weight of it. My chest felt heavy, like something long held had finally been set down. I wasn't sad in a sharp way. I was sad in a tired way. The kind of sadness that comes from realizing how long you've ignored yourself. I thought about all the moments when I felt distant but didn't say anything. All the times I felt numb but told myself it didn't matter. All the evenings I filled with noise so I wouldn't have to feel the quiet. I had been patient with everyone else. I had been understanding. I had been reliable, but I hadn't been present with myself. The realization softened me. I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel ashamed. I felt honest. For the first time, I allowed myself to admit what I had been avoiding. I wasn't broken. I was disconnected. The sentence landed gently, like something I had been waiting to hear. I wasn't missing pieces. I wasn't damaged. I wasn't incapable of feeling. I had simply stepped away from myself little by little until distance felt normal. I closed my eyes and took a slow breath. The room stayed quiet. Nothing changed around me, but something inside me shifted. The sadness didn't ask to be fixed. It didn't demand action. It just wanted to be acknowledged. So I stayed with it. I let myself feel the weight of the years, not with regret, but with understanding. I had done what I thought was necessary. I had learned how to survive, how to stay stable, how to keep going. I just hadn't learned how to stay connected. That wasn't a failure. It was a skill I had never practiced. I felt tears rise slightly, but they didn't fall. I didn't need them to. The emotion wasn't asking for release. It was asking for recognition. I whispered the truth quietly, as if saying it too loudly might break it. I wasn't broken. I was disconnected. And hearing the words out loud made them real. And in that reality, there was relief. I realized how much pressure I had put on myself to feel something dramatic, to have a clear reason, to justify my emptiness with a story that made sense. But emptiness doesn't always come with a cause you can point to. Sometimes it comes from long periods of ignoring your inner life. Sometimes it comes from being strong for too long. Sometimes it comes from never stopping to ask how you are, honestly. I had lived that way for years. Admitting it didn't collapse me. It steadied me. I sat there longer, letting the quiet hold me. The apartment didn't feel empty. It felt calm, like a place that had been waiting for me to arrive fully. I thought about how often I tried to distract myself from moments like this, how afraid I had been of sitting still long enough to notice the truth. Now that I noticed it, it didn't feel dangerous. It felt human. I felt compassion for myself in a way I hadn't before. Not pity, not sadness, compassion. I hadn't chosen emptiness. I had drifted into it. And drifting can be reversed. I didn't make promises that night. I didn't plan changes or imagine a different future. I didn't need to. This moment wasn't about fixing anything. It was about admitting something I had denied for too long. The emptiness wasn't my identity. It was a signal that I had been living without listening. I opened my eyes and looked around the room. The lamp cast a soft light on the wall. The furniture stood quietly in place. The space felt safe. I wasn't alone in a frightening way. I was alone in a true way. And that truth felt grounding. I took another breath and noticed how my body responded. The tension had eased slightly. My shoulders felt lower. My thoughts felt slower. Nothing had changed externally, but internally something important had happened. I had stopped lying to myself. The night continued quietly. Time passed without pressure. I didn't reach for my phone. I didn't turn on the television. I let the silence stay. The emptiness was still there, but it no longer felt confusing. It had a shape now, a meaning. It wasn't asking me to escape. It was asking me to reconnect. As I stood up and prepared for bed, I felt tired in a way that felt clean, not drained, not heavy, just honest. I lay down in the dark and closed my eyes. The quiet returned once more, but this time it didn't scare me. I wasn't broken. I was disconnected. And now that I knew that, I sensed deeply, calmly, that this wasn't the end of something. It was the moment I finally stopped pretending. The moment I admitted the truth. And that honesty, quiet as it was, felt like the beginning of coming back. Chapter 6. Understanding what emptiness really is. After that night, I didn't feel suddenly better, but I felt clearer. The emptiness was still there, moving quietly through my days, but it no longer felt like a mystery I had to solve. It felt like something I could listen to. I began to notice when it showed up. It appeared in moments of silence, in pauses between tasks, in the space after conversations ended. It didn't shout for attention. It waited. For years, I had treated that feeling as a problem, something to fix, something to hide, something to explain away. Now I wondered if I had misunderstood it. What if emptiness wasn't failure? What if it wasn't a sign that something was wrong with me? The idea felt unfamiliar, almost uncomfortable. I had lived so long believing that feeling empty meant I was doing life incorrectly, that I was missing something essential, that I had fallen behind in some invisible way. But as I paid closer attention, I noticed something important. The emptiness didn't feel angry. It didn't feel broken. It felt tired. I thought about how often I ignored my own needs, how easily I pushed through exhaustion because stopping felt inconvenient, how rarely I asked myself what I wanted, not in theory, but in practice. I remembered moments when my body asked for rest and I answered with productivity, moments when my emotions asked for space and I answered with distraction, moments when I felt overwhelmed and told myself to be stronger. I had been listening to expectations more than myself. The emptiness wasn't sudden. It had grown slowly in the space created by years of not listening. That realization changed how I saw it. Emptiness wasn't the absence of something. It was the accumulation of ignored things, ignored feelings, ignored limits, ignored truths. I began to understand that my body and mind had been speaking to me for a long time. I just hadn't learned how to hear them. Instead of saying, "You are failing," the emptiness was saying, "Pay attention." Instead of saying, "You are broken," it was saying, "You are tired." That shift softened something inside me. I didn't feel blamed. I felt informed. Responsibility replaced shame. I wasn't at fault for feeling empty, but I was responsible for listening now that I could hear it. I started noticing small signals I used to ignore. Tightness in my chest when I agreed to something I didn't want. A quiet heaviness when I stayed silent instead of speaking honestly. A sense of relief when I canceled plans, followed by guilt. Those signals had always been there. I just hadn't taken them seriously. I realized how often I told myself I didn't have time to feel, how easily I postponed rest, reflection, and honesty for a later. Later had turned into years. Emptiness wasn't punishment for those years. It was the message that arrived when everything else finally quieted down. The message said, "You can't ignore yourself forever." That didn't feel harsh. It felt fair. I stopped asking, "What's wrong with me?" I started asking, "What have I been ignoring?" The difference mattered. One question attacked me. The other invited me. I thought about how often people describe emptiness as something negative, something to escape. But sitting with it, I saw another side. Emptiness created space. Space for honesty. Space for rest. Space for listening. It wasn't comfortable, but it wasn't cruel either. I didn't need to fill it immediately. I needed to understand it. I paid attention to how my body felt when I slowed down, when I didn't rush to respond, when I allowed myself to say no without explanation. The emptiness shifted in those moments. It didn't disappear, but it softened, like it was being acknowledged. That was new. I realized that for years, I had lived past my limits without noticing. I treated tiredness as weakness, emotional distance as maturity, silence as something to avoid. Those choices made sense at the time. They helped me function. But function is not the same as feel. Emptiness was not asking me to change everything. It was asking me to reconnect. Reconnect with my limits. reconnect with my emotions, reconnect with myself. That didn't require dramatic action, it required attention. I noticed how gently this understanding arrived. No crisis forced it, no breakdown demanded it. It came because I finally stopped running. I stopped labeling emptiness as an enemy. I let it speak, and what it said was simple. Emptiness was my body asking me to listen, not to judge, not to fix, not to perform, just to listen. That insight didn't make me feel powerful, it made me feel human. I understood that ignoring myself hadn't been a mistake, it had been a strategy, one I used until it stopped working. Now I needed a new one. Listening felt like the right place to start. I didn't blame my past self for not knowing this sooner. I understood why I lived the way I did. Life rewards endurance. It praises resilience. It celebrates those who keep going. Few people teach you how to stop. Emptiness was teaching me that now. It wasn't asking for immediate answers. It was asking for presence. As days passed, I noticed how my relationship with the emptiness changed. It no longer frightened me. It no longer felt like proof of something missing. It felt like information. Useful, honest, quiet. I realized that understanding emptiness didn't remove it right away, but it removed the fear around it. And without fear, I could finally begin to respond instead of react. I could slow down without guilt. I could rest without explaining myself. I could feel without rushing to label or escape. That felt like progress. Not loud, not visible, but real. For the first time in years, the emptiness didn't feel like an ending. It felt like a conversation I was finally ready to have. And I stayed, listening. Chapter 7. Learning to feel again. I didn't wake up one morning suddenly full of emotion. Nothing dramatic happened. The changes were small, almost unnoticeable at first. So small that I could have missed them if I wasn't paying attention. I began by slowing down. Not all at once, not in a way that changed my schedule completely, just enough to notice what I was doing while I was doing it. I stopped rushing through my mornings. I drank my coffee without checking my phone at the same time. I walked instead of hurrying when I didn't need to hurry. The world didn't collapse because I moved more slowly. That surprised me. I noticed how uncomfortable it felt at first. Slowing down gave my thoughts space to rise, space I had avoided for years. My mind filled the quiet with questions, doubts, unfinished feelings. I wanted to speed up again. Instead, I stayed. I practiced saying no. Not loudly, not dramatically, just quietly when something didn't feel right. No to plans that left me drained. No to conversations I didn't have energy for. No to expectations I had carried without questioning. Each no felt heavy at first. My chest tightened. Guilt followed quickly. I was used to saying yes. Yes kept things smooth. Yes kept people comfortable. Yes kept me busy. But every no created a little space, and in that space, something new appeared. Feeling. It didn't arrive as joy. It arrived as discomfort. I felt irritation I had pushed down for years, sadness I never named, tiredness that finally had a room to exist. At times, I wondered if this was a mistake. I had felt empty before, but at least emptiness was quiet. These feelings were not. They asked for attention. They stayed longer than I wanted them to. Fear rose alongside them. What if feeling again makes things harder? What if I can't handle it? What if I open something I can't close? Those questions scared me. But there was relief, too. Relief in knowing that what I felt was real. I wasn't numb anymore. I noticed how my body responded when I allowed quiet, how tension moved instead of staying stuck, how my breathing changed when I didn't rush to distract myself. Some evenings I sat alone and felt sadness without a clear reason. It didn't overwhelm me, it just existed. I let it. Other times I felt anger, not loud anger, just a firm awareness that something had crossed my limits. That feeling felt unfamiliar, but also honest. I realized that emptiness had protected me from these feelings. It had kept everything at a distance. Now that the distance was closing, emotions were returning one by one. Not all of them were pleasant, but all of them were real. I started noticing moments of warmth, too. Small ones, unexpected ones. A quiet laugh that came naturally, a moment of connection and conversation that didn't feel forced, a sense of peace while sitting by the window in the evening. Those moments didn't last long, but they existed, and that mattered. Feeling again didn't mean constant happiness. It meant movement. It meant my inner world was no longer frozen. I paid attention to how often I wanted to escape discomfort, to reach for noise, to distract myself. Sometimes I did, and that was okay. Healing wasn't about perfection. It was about noticing. I noticed how fear and relief lived together now. Fear of what feeling might bring, relief that something inside me was alive again. Feeling again was uncomfortable, but real. That sentence stayed with me. I didn't need to like every feeling. I didn't need to understand them right away. I just needed to let them exist. I thought about how long I had avoided this, how many years I had chosen numbness because it felt safer. Now I understood the cost. Numbness kept pain away, but it kept everything else away too. I learned to sit with feelings without solving them, to let sadness pass through without turning it into a story, to let anger exist without judging it. This was harder than distraction, but it felt truer. I noticed how my speech changed. I was slower to respond, more careful with my words, more honest about what I could and couldn't give. Some people didn't understand. That was uncomfortable, but it didn't break me. I realized that healing didn't mean becoming someone new. It meant returning to parts of myself I had left behind, parts that felt deeply, parts that needed rest, parts that had something to say. The emptiness didn't disappear completely, but it changed. It no longer felt like absence. It felt like space being filled, slowly, carefully, honestly. I trusted the process, even when it felt uncertain. There were days when I wished to go back to numbness, days when feeling too much felt exhausting. On those days, I reminded myself why I started, not to feel better, to feel real. That difference mattered. Learning to feel again wasn't a straight path. It moved forward and backward. It asked for patience. It asked for kindness towards myself. But each time I allowed a feeling to exist without running from it, something shifted. I felt closer to myself, more present, more alive in a quiet way. I didn't announce this change to anyone. There was no moment of recognition from the outside. This healing wasn't visible, but it was happening. Slowly, honestly, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was just surviving my life. I was beginning to experience it. Feeling again wasn't easy, but it was worth it, because real connection doesn't come from avoiding discomfort. It comes from staying. And I was finally learning how to stay. Chapter 8. I didn't lose myself. I went quiet. When I looked back, I didn't see a moment where everything suddenly changed. There was no clear turning point, no day I could point to and say, "This is when I became whole again." What I saw instead was a quiet shift that happened over time. Small moments of honesty, small pauses, small choices to stay instead of run. Together, they changed how I lived. The emptiness that once followed me everywhere was still there, but it no longer controlled me. It didn't decide how I spent my time or how I treated myself. It didn't frighten me into distraction or silence. It had lost its power. I noticed how differently my days felt now. They were still simple, still ordinary, still filled with routine, but I was present inside them. I woke up and felt my body wake with me. I noticed light in the room, the sound of the morning, the weight of my breath. I didn't rush to escape the quiet anymore. At work, I listened more carefully, not just to others, but to myself. I noticed when I felt tired, when something felt wrong, when I needed a break. I didn't always act on it immediately, but I noticed. That alone made a difference. I still smiled, I still laughed, I still went through the motions of daily life, but now those reactions came from somewhere real. Not all the time, but often enough. The numbness that once flattened everything had softened. It appeared less often and stayed for shorter periods. When it returned, I didn't panic. I recognized it. I asked what it was trying to tell me. Life hadn't become exciting or dramatic. It had become honest. I understood now that I hadn't lost myself along the way. I hadn't disappeared or failed. I had gone quiet. Quiet from years of not listening. Quiet from choosing function over feeling. Quiet from believing strength meant silence. That quiet wasn't permanent. It was protective, and now it wasn't needed in the same way. I thought about how hard I had been on myself, how often I believed something was wrong just because I felt empty, how easily I judged myself by standards I never chose. I felt compassion for that version of me. They were doing their best. They didn't know another way. I didn't feel the need to rush forward anymore. I didn't feel the pressure to catch up or prove anything. Peace had replaced numbness, not all at once, but steadily. Peace felt different than happiness. It was calmer. It didn't depend on outcomes or excitement. It didn't need constant reassurance. It simply existed. I noticed it in the way my body rested when I sat still, in the way my thoughts moved more slowly, in the way I allowed moments to pass without needing to fill them. I wasn't chasing meaning anymore. I was experiencing it. The world around me hadn't changed much. People were still busy. Life still moved quickly. Noise still existed everywhere. But inside me, something had settled. I no longer felt the need to disappear into distraction. I no longer feared silence. I no longer believed emptiness meant something was wrong. I understood now what emptiness had been. It was a pause created by years of holding myself back, a pause waiting for my attention. And when I finally listened, it softened. I didn't become a different person. I became a more present one. There were still difficult days, days when old habits returned, days when numbness tried to settle back in. But now I noticed sooner. I responded with kindness instead of avoidance. I trusted myself more. That trust changed how I moved through the world. I chose rest without guilt. I spoke more honestly. I allowed myself to feel without judgment. I didn't announce this change to anyone. There was no celebration, but there was quiet satisfaction. the kind that comes from knowing you are finally living in alignment with yourself. I sat one evening in the same place where I had once admitted the truth for the first time. The room looked the same. The light fell softly on the walls. The quiet returned, familiar and calm. This time, it didn't bring fear. It brought gratitude. I realized how much I had learned from listening, how much clarity came from staying instead of escaping, how much strength existed in stillness. I didn't feel empty anymore, not because my life was full of things, but because I was fully there. I placed my hand on my chest and felt my breath move slowly. The moment didn't ask for anything else, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel like something was missing. I felt complete in a quiet way. The journey hadn't been dramatic, it had been honest. I felt empty for years, but I was never gone. I was waiting to be heard. And now that I had listened, I knew something important. I didn't need to become someone new. I just needed to come back. And I had.